Questions, extraneous materials for the record subject to the length limitation in the rules. I recognize myself for the opening statement. Time again, we are reminded of the massive damage that terrorists cause, even with just a little money. Today, terrorist groups have more money than some small countries. ISIS is the richest terrorist organization in world history, bringing in over $1 billion in 2014 alone. Drawing on these funds, ISIS has managed to stage terrorist attacks throughout the world and kill thousands of people. ISIS is not alone. Terrorists raise billions annually to carry out their bloody agendas. This is precisely why our government agencies have been tasked with stemming the flow of money to terrorist groups. When we can separate the terrorists from their money, lives can be saved. According to the Treasury Department, the underlying vulnerabilities within the U.S. financial system today, quote, remain largely the same as those identified in 2005. Terrorists are still able to park and move cash through financial systems. Part of the problem is that the United States still does not have a comprehensive strategy across all American agencies to combat terrorist financing. Policies and priorities differ from one agency to the next in a seemingly ad hoc fashion. In fact, there isn't even a clear method by which our various agencies can coordinate their efforts. Agencies working on a counter-terrorist finance had previously coordinated through the Terrorist Financing Working Group. However, this working group has been on a hiatus for some time, and agencies are forced to coordinate informally. Another tool to counter terrorist financing that hasn't been used, designation of domestic charities. According to the Treasury Department's website, the United States has not blacklisted any charities since the February of 2009 designation of the Tamil Foundation. There are also non-concrete metrics in place to measure the effectiveness of counter-terrorist finance efforts, making it difficult to determine the need and appropriate tools required for a successful strategy. For instance, the Counter-ISIL Finance Cell was established in late 2014 to work on intelligent collection and operations to cut off ISIS financing. The administration says that the cell has significantly improved our understanding of ISIS's financial activity. This is a start, but what are the cell's metrics of success? What are its goals, and how do we know if it's doing a good job? Beyond its own government efforts, we still have a long way to go when it comes to cooperating with our international partners to counter terror finance, to ensure our efforts are not fragmented and that our respective skills and intelligence are leveraged correctly. Sometimes our international partners seem to be doing exactly the opposite of what our policy is. According to U.S. government figures, terrorist groups earned over $165 million between 2000 and 2014 from governments that make ransom payments. To better understand the significance of this troubling trend, Treasury Undersecretary David Cohen said in 2012 that kidnapping for ransom has become so lucrative for terrorists that it's today's most significant source of terrorist financing. Denying terrorists ransom payments is not just a U.S. policy, it's the international standard championed by the Financial Action Task Force, the Counter-ISIL Financing Group, and the United Nations. International noncompliance with anti-terror financing standards does not just end there. According to a Financial Action Task Force report, almost every country in the world has enacted anti-terror financing laws, but only 33 of the 194 countries surveyed have actually reported any convictions using these laws. The laws are worthless unless they're put into action. We must do more to get our partners to implement these laws so that they have already passed in their respective nations. Our international partners can also do more to stop the flow of money from private donors to terrorist groups. Between 2013 and 14, ISIS received $40 million from donors in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Kuwait. All those countries have terror financing laws on the books, but the money still flows across their borders to ISIS. The more we can improve on both our internal coordination and our international cooperation, the less money terrorists can have. We need more information. We need to have more information, and we know both wildlife trafficking and trade-based money laundering are sources for revenue for terrorists as well. We've simply not collected the necessary intelligence, however, and done the required analysis to understand these sources. Going after sources of revenue for terrorists can be a powerful tool to render them powerless. Terrorists need money to pay their fighters, buy their weapons, and pull off the attacks. If we can work to deny them the money, that means we are a big step closer to defeating terrorists worldwide. I'll now yield to the gentleman from South Carolina to make his opening statement.
Thank you, Judge Poe, and thank you for recommending this hearing on such an important topic. And I am pleased that we are reviewing this subject in a joint hearing of the two subcommittees. Since I sit on your subcommittee in addition to chairing the emerging threats, I consider this a very efficient use of time. I would also like to thank Ranking Member Jim Langevin and Ranking Member Bill Keating for their contributions and participation today. We welcome our panel of experts from this interagency team for today's hearing. I would especially like to welcome back Secretary Teresa Whalen from the Department of Defense. Secretary Whalen has appeared before the Armed Services Committee many times, as well as the subcommittee. She brings a wealth of knowledge and experience on important issues within her portfolio. And I am pleased to have the opportunity today to talk about the topic of countering terrorist financing with our colleagues from the Terrorism, Nonproliferation, and Trade Subcommittee. I'm honored to be the chairman of the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee as we oversee some of the most forward-looking, cutting-edge, and in-demand aspects of the Department of Defense. As we consider this important topic today of countering terrorist financing, I think we should keep in mind two important frames of reference. First, countering the finances of terrorist groups remains a relatively new area of focus of the United States government and interagency in particular. Although the attacks of September 11th served as the most recent forcing function, the subsequent wars of Afghanistan and Iraq showed us that the unabated financing of terrorist and insurgents groups can prolong conflicts and frustrate our national security objectives, putting American families at risk. The more recent rise of ISIL or Daesh with nearly $1 billion in annual revenue proves again, for our enemies, cash remains king. Second, we should continually keep in mind how difficult this problem set is. Illuminating and countering the finances of illicit and terrorist networks that operate in ever-changing and clandestine manner is very difficult work. I encourage each of the colleagues today to ask questions of our witnesses on how they are resourced in this important fight to stem the flow of dollars to our enemies. I again would like to thank Judge Poe for holding this joint hearing between the two subcommittees. I look forward to hearing from our distinguished panel of witnesses today, and with that, yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the Chairman of the Armed Services Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee. I yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Bill Keating, for his opening statement, the ranking member of the Terrorism Subcommittee.
Well, thank you, Chairman Poe, for conducting the afternoon's hearing, and I appreciate your concern for terrorist financing and your leadership on continuing this conversation, both within Congress and externally. I'd also like to thank Chairman Wilson and Ranking Member Langevin of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities for their shared focus and work on the subject as well. And of course, I appreciate the time of our witnesses who joined from the Department of State, Treasury, Defense, and Interior to discuss this critical topic. Your ongoing attention and commitment to countering terrorist financing is the bedrock of our coordinated effort to stop the money flow, as the title of today's hearing suggests. I also think it should be said strongly and with great appreciation for the work that's done by our men and women that are serving us so well in the military. Just within the last 4 weeks, I had the honor to join them aboard the aircraft carrier Harry S. Truman and see their mission in interrupting financing as well in a direct military sense. Their success at destroying cash depots and interrupting oil supply has been extraordinary, and their service should be recognized in this hearing as well. But as we know, terrorist financing has to be resolved at many levels in terms of trying to attack it, and it's a complicated, intricate, nuanced, and clandestine effort, making it difficult to identify, follow, and to stop. Organized groups such as ISIL rely on diversified revenue streams ranging from pirated oil fields and extortion to imposition of taxes on areas that it controls, to seizures and to the sale of looted antiquities. Our concern doesn't end with the trafficking of foreign terrorist organizations. However, organized crime syndicates also fund illicit activities through a variety of subversive efforts. Wildlife trafficking, for example, is estimated to generate billions of dollars for organized crime enterprises. It's also been reported that these groups are using human and organ trafficking as well as for a revenue source, in addition to illicitly smuggling tobacco and tobacco products. Not only do such black market dealings contribute to an illegal economy, but they fuel instability and they undermine global security. This is not to say the U.S. has not had success. Just this week, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service led efforts to institute a near-total ban on domestic commercial trade of elephant ivory, which aims at reducing the opportunities for wildlife traffickers to trade illegal ivory under the guise of legal products. Over a 3-year period, an estimated 100,000 elephants were killed for their ivory, which is an average of approximately 1 every 15 minutes. These animals' ivory generates millions of dollars in illegal funds. Separately, last month, the President signed into law legislation that imposes tough new import restrictions on antiquities that are trafficked out of Syria. I was proud to play a leading role in advancing H.R. 1493 along with the support of the Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ed Royce, Ranking Member Engel, and Chairman Judge Poe. These successes, however, should not allow us to become complacent. While identifying and stopping traditional financing methods such as hawalas and hawala trade-based money laundering, the cash couriers are important. Agencies must look at new and emerging ways through which organizations are able to generate funds. Virtual currency platforms and digital finance allows organized crime and terrorist groups to commit crimes anonymously. Digital currencies could facilitate money laundering, alleviate the need for criminal infrastructures at their base. With respect to terrorism, anonymous marketplaces on the Internet allow the sale of illegal goods and services and risk the convergence of terrorism and organized crime. We must utilize all the resources at our disposal to target every terrorist organized crime funding entity, no matter where it comes from. I look forward to hearing today's witness on these subjects, as well as working with our international allies to end and prevent terrorist organizations from generating this type of illicit money. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman from Massachusetts. I recognize the ranking member of the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee, Mr. James Lanovan of Rhode Island, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and Chairman Wilson and Ranking Member Keating for convening this hearing, and especially want to thank our witnesses for being here today. In particular, I want to welcome Secretary Whalen here, who's been before our subcommittee many times. I appreciate your presence to all of you and look forward to your testimony. So I'm pleased to join my Foreign Affairs Committee colleagues on the topic of countering threat financing. The combined force of our committees on this issue is paramount because effective CTF requires the collaboration and synchronization of a multitude of U.S. government agencies. Holding this joint hearing will provide us an opportunity to understand CTF efforts and strategies in a holistic manner and what we can do to enhance its overall effectiveness. Threat financing activities comes in many forms, from, as my colleagues have touched on already, from illicit drug trafficking to wildlife poaching to ISIL's alarming oil revenues. Understanding such activities and the associated organizations and networks, of course, is the first step, including the alternative financing to traditional financial institutions, as Mr. Keating had talked about, understanding the role that that is playing. The Department of Defense plays a key role in this endeavor by providing threat finance intelligence, or TFI, to enhance our understanding of the challenges before us. Today, I look forward to hearing more about how such information is shared amongst agencies in a timely manner and used to produce synchronized goals and efforts to disrupt, degrade, and destroy such financing. I also look forward to hearing from the DoD and other agencies about the progress that has been made when it comes to institutionalizing CTF. This collaboration in Afghanistan resulted in many successes, and it's imperative we have a grasp on how such lessons learned are being leveraged. With respect to the DoD, has progress been made on gaps identified in the recent capabilities-based assessment, such as CTF integration into joint plans and joint doctrine? How are we measuring the effectiveness of these efforts? And finally, I hope today will provide insight into ongoing U.S. government efforts in countering ISIL's oil revenue and the challenges we face with this front, as well as overall challenges with CTF that our committees could be helpful in providing solutions to when working with agencies. So with that, I thank again our witnesses for being here, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will yield back.
Thank the gentleman from Rhode Island. Without objection, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. I'll introduce the witnesses and give them time for opening statements. Mr. Daniel Glazer is the Assistant Secretary for Terrorist Financing in the Treasury Department's Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence. Mr. Andrew Keller is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Counter-Threat Finance and Sanctions in the State Department's Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs. Ms. Teresa Whalen serves as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense for Special Operations Low-Intensity Conflicts. She is a career member of the Senior Executive Service and has worked for 27 years in the Defense Intelligence area. Mr. William Woody is the Chief of the Office of Law Enforcement of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Without objection, the witnesses' prepared statements will be made part of the record. I ask the witnesses, please keep your remarks to no more than 5 minutes. If you hear the gavel, that means you've got to stop. So 5 minutes, and we will start with you, Mr. Glazer. You may present your opening statement.
Chairman Poe, Chairman Wilson, Ranking Members Keating and Langevin, thank you for inviting me to testify on our efforts to combat terrorist financing. Disrupting the flow of funds to terrorists and terrorist organizations is an integral part of our broader strategy to combat terrorism. Treasury is in a unique position to advance these efforts. At its core, combating terrorist financing consists of 2 interrelated objectives. First, cutting terrorists off from their sources of revenue so they cannot make money. Second, denying them access to the international financial system so they cannot use the money they have. We accomplish these goals by improving financial transparency globally so that terrorists cannot anonymously raise, move, and use funds without detection, and then identifying, disrupting, and dismantling the network supporting terrorist organizations. We have a range of tools available to us to do so: financial measures, such as targeted sanctions and Section 311 of the USA Patriot Act, law enforcement actions, and engagement with foreign partners in the private sector. The combined effect of these efforts is to create an international financial system that is a hostile environment for terrorist financing. I would like to briefly summarize our efforts to disrupt the financial networks of 3 prominent terrorist organizations: ISIL, Al-Qaeda, and Hezbollah. I'll speak first to ISIL, the vast majority of whose revenue, estimated at almost $1 billion in 2015, is derived internally from a combination of oil sales and extortion of the population and commercial activity under its control. The fact that these sources of revenue are derived from ISIL's control of territory has meant that military action has been an important component of our response. Under Operation Tidal Wave 2, the coalition directly targeted ISIL's entire oil supply chain and destroyed tens of millions and possibly more than $100 million of ISIL's bulk cash. Our response, however, has been broader than military action. For example, the government of Iraq decided in August 2015 to ban the distribution of government salaries into ISIL-held areas, thereby eliminating ISIL's ability to tax these substantial funds. Additionally, we have worked closely with the Central Bank of Iraq to secure Iraq's financial system from access by ISIL. Turning now to Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda remains a critical threat to the United States, and we continue to aggressively target the organization around the world. Al-Qaeda has historically received funds from within Gulf countries, safe haven in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and now is increasingly present in Yemen and Syria. We have made significant progress targeting Al-Qaeda's financing in concert with our partners internationally. However, the terrorist financing risk emanating from the Gulf remains a priority. Collectively, Gulf countries have pursued a wide range of actions, including implementing targeted financial measures and prosecuting terrorists for financing Al-Qaeda, but considerable work remains to be done to ensure that terrorist financiers are unable to raise and move funds within Gulf countries, and we're committed to working with our partners in the region to see that this is done. Our efforts have not been limited solely to the Gulf. Treasury has continued to work towards disrupting and dismantling terrorist financial networks in Afghanistan and Pakistan as well. We have aggressively used Treasury tools to limit al-Qaeda funding streams, designating over 140 individuals affiliated with al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations throughout Afghanistan and Pakistan. It is important to remember, however, that before al-Qaeda's attack on 9/11, Hezbollah had killed more Americans than any other terrorist organization in history, and it continues to plot terrorist attacks around the world. Hezbollah receives the majority of its funding, hundreds of millions of dollars, from Iran, as well as millions of dollars from a global network of supporters and businesses. Our approach has focused on targeting Hezbollah both within Lebanon, constraining it financially through extensive cooperation with Lebanese authorities and banks, and globally by targeting its procurement agents and financiers in Europe, Latin America, East Asia, and the Middle East, identifying and sanctioning Hezbollah's Iranian sponsors, and enabling law enforcement and foreign partner actions. Our toolkit to impose targeted measures against Hezbollah was recently expanded with the passage of the Hezbollah International Financing Prevention Act of 2015, or HIFPA. HIFPA represents a continuation of our policy to financially weaken Hezbollah. Foremost in ensuring our implementation of HIFPA is our close collaboration with the Central Bank of Lebanon and private Lebanese financial institutions, which are adhering to this legislation, to Hezbollah's great consternation. We intend to implement HIFPA robustly in a manner that is consistent with preserving the strength and health of the Lebanese financial system and that does not target any specific community or sect. Our implementation intends to target one group and one group only: Hezbollah, the organization, its members, the entities it owns and controls. While new terrorist financing challenges will surely emerge, Treasury and its interagency partners will continue to employ a range of measures to identify, disrupt, and dismantle terrorist financial networks and work to identify and close loopholes that terrorists and other illicit actors can use to access the international financial system. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Glazer. Mr. Keller, you have 5 minutes.
Chairman Poe, Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Keating, Ranking Member Langevin, distinguished members of the committees, thank you for the opportunity to speak here today about the State Department's counterterrorism finance efforts. Counterterrorism finance is a top priority for the Department of State, and we have a wide variety of tools to disrupt terrorist financial networks. It is a complex and dynamic threat, and one that requires the U.S. government to utilize the full range of its resources and authorities. My office at the State Department helps coordinate policy and liaise with our interagency partners, including the Departments of Treasury and Defense, to achieve our counterterrorism goals. We also work closely with the State Department's Counterterrorism Bureau and the Department of Treasury on counterterrorism finance sanctions to ensure that our sanctions promote broader U.S. foreign policy interests. The fight against ISIL is one of the top national security priorities, and it is my principal counterterrorism focus. That is where I will focus my remarks today. As you highlighted, Chairman Poe, ISIL's revenues in 2014 and 2015 made it the richest terrorist group in the world. Yet as a result of U.S. and coalition efforts, ISIL's revenues are on a downward trajectory, which has impacted its operations in Iraq and Syria. I'd like to provide 2 examples. ISIL has cut salary payments to its fighters in Raqqa and Mosul by 50%, leading many ISIL fighters to defect. And ISIL has increasingly resorted to arbitrary tax increases and outright theft to make up the funding gap, further undermining its claims to legitimacy. While we are encouraged by these indications of financial stress, we are fully aware that there is still much work to do to further weaken ISIL on the financial front. Our most effective method of disrupting ISIL's revenues to date has been U.S. and coalition strikes against their oil and gas supply chain and cash storage sites. These efforts have reduced ISIL's oil revenues by up to 1/3 and destroyed tens and potentially hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cash. Kinetic efforts have complemented diplomatic efforts aimed at ISIL's finances. The U.S. government helped establish and now co-leads an international working group dedicated to counter-ISIL finance, and we have negotiated multiple UN Security Council resolutions to increase financial pressure on ISIL. In particular, I would highlight Security Council Resolution 2199, which imposes obligations on all countries to take steps to combat ISIL financing, particularly in the areas of oil, antiquities, and kidnapping for ransom. The Department of State also conducts bilateral diplomatic engagement with key countries in the Middle East and around the world. Our embassies consistently engage foreign government officials on specific terrorism finance matters, promote counterterrorism finance tools more generally, and encourage implementation of domestic and international legal frameworks to combat terrorism. In an effort to address the systemic gaps in the international system that terrorists and other criminals exploit to raise and transfer funds, the State Department also allocates significant funding to build the capacity of partner countries to counter terrorist financing. The Bureau of Counterterrorism is helping partner nations build their capacity to investigate and prosecute illicit financial transactions, while the State Department Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement funds programs to help countries identify how they can improve their anti-money laundering and counterterrorism finance regulations. With regard to trafficking in antiquities, the Department of State has also led outreach to prominent antiquities dealers, auction houses, and museum administrators. We have offered up to $5 million worth of reward money for information leading to the disruption of ISIL's trafficking in antiquities through our Rewards for Justice program, and we have funded government and civil society training program to help protect antiquities in Iraq, Syria, and Libya. Terrorism finance is a multifaceted and dynamic problem, and ISIL has proven to be a resilient foe. As our efforts targeting ISIL financing demonstrate, counterterrorism finance is a top priority for the State Department and our interagency partners. We will continue to use every tool available to maintain the growing effectiveness of our economic campaign. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. Ms. Whalen.
Chairman Wilson, Chairman Poe, Ranking Member Langevin, Ranking Member Keating, and other distinguished members of the subcommittees, I appreciate the opportunity to share information with you about the Department of Defense's counter-threat finance capability. DoD's counter-threat finance, or CTF, supports both military operations and U.S. government partners, including our law enforcement colleagues. DoD CTF identifies and exploits the financial vulnerabilities of terrorists and transnational criminals. Over a decade ago, we built a small but effective CTF capability within the department through our authorities and appropriations. Counter-narcotics is an appropriate source of authority and resources, given that the drug trade remains the world's most lucrative criminal enterprise. Funds from the illegal drug trade are often associated with other illicit criminal enterprises, insurgencies, and terrorist organizations, including the Taliban in Afghanistan, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the FARC, and Lebanese Hezbollah. Today, DoD has dedicated CTF teams at its combatant commands, at the National Guard Bureau, and at intelligence components. The CTF teams analyze financial intelligence, integrate intelligence and operations, and coordinate and execute CTF activities within the department and with and in support of U.S. interagency partners. DoD is not the lead U.S. agency for conducting CTF, but DoD employs unique analytic capabilities to assist other partners in accomplishing the overall CTF mission. For example, DoD analysts help support our Department of Treasury colleagues' efforts to develop designations against individuals and organizations engaged in illicit finance. DoD CTF analysts help to identify vulnerabilities and to create a comprehensive analysis for U.S. government partners to target an adversary's financial structure. CTF has proven to be a cost-effective tool against threatening forces and transnational criminal organizations, whether through law enforcement actions, designations, sanctions, or, as in the case of ISIL, through military actions against economic and financial targets. DoD CTF supports the Department of State and the Department of Treasury, which are the co-leads for the U.S. government's effort to disrupt ISIL's finances. Over the past several months, ISIL has lost financial capability and revenue. Coalition military operations informed by CTF have struck nearly 24 ISIL bulk cash storage sites and multiple targets affiliated with ISIL's illicit oil industry. Recent estimates indicate ISIL's oil production has decreased by up to 30%, and their ability to generate revenue has been reduced by at least as much. In order for DoD CTF to continue supporting these and future successes on the battlefield and in law enforcement and diplomacy, we must ensure that our CTF capability is well grounded in our department's policy, planning, doctrine, and training, and education. For example, last October, the Deputy Secretary of Defense recertified DoD's directive on counter-threat finance policy through 2020. We also are working to ensure that DoD plans and joint doctrine include CTF where appropriate. Congress's support for the DoD counter-drug authorities and counter-drug funding underpins our CTF program's success. Thanks to congressional support, executive branch partnership, and our talented DoD CTF personnel who work quietly behind the scenes, DoD CTF continues to provide a cost-effective capability against international terrorist and criminal adversaries that threaten our nation, its citizens, and our allies. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you the information about DoD's counter-threat finance program, and I welcome your comments and questions.
Thank you, Ms. Whalen. Mr. Woody.
Good afternoon, Chairman Poe, Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Keating, Ranking Member Langevin, and members of the subcommittees. I'm William Woody. I'm Chief of Law Enforcement for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. Wildlife trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar illegal trade fueled by demand and enabled by corruption, limited legal authorities, and law enforcement capacity. Globally, organized criminal groups have seized upon wildlife trafficking as a low-risk, high-reward, and have made illegal wildlife trafficking a crisis. Our special agents and inspectors have specifically documented transnational organizations involved in trafficking of endangered species. We have documented Eastern European and Russian organized crime in the caviar trade, Irish organized crime in the rhino horn trade, Mexican drug organizations in the totoaba trade, African gangs in the elephant ivory poaching and smuggling, and Asian criminal groups in timber trafficking. I'd like to draw your attention now to the slides. Of course, the slides don't come up. Photo.
Is that the slide you're looking for?
That's the slide I'm looking for. Thank you, sir.
Who are those guys?
This photo represents criminals arrested nationwide for trafficking in rhino horn, elephant ivory, totoaba, and narwhal tusks. A number of these individuals were arrested in our investigation named Operation Crash, which is focused on rhino horn trafficking. To date, Operation Crash has resulted in 41 arrests, 30 convictions, and the wildlife and the proceeds seized in this case have a street value in excess of $75 million. In addition to crimes against wildlife, the defendants have also been charged with money laundering, tax evasion, falsifying documents, mail fraud, and bribery. Photo 2, please. Jimmy and Felix Kaw were convicted of a number of crimes related to international trafficking of rhino horn. During this investigation, our agents conducted a financial analysis of Kaw's business, the Win Lee Corporation. Records revealed that large deposits were being made into bank accounts from others who became targets of the investigation as well. The documented foreign wire transfers confirmed foreign nationals involved in rhino horn trafficking here in the U.S. By the use of FinCEN records, our agents were able to substantiate money laundering activity in a scheme involving the use of gold as currency and the use of safety deposit boxes. Photo 3, please. The Kaw and their businesses were sentenced to pay over $1 million in fines and penalties and restitution, and in addition forfeited over $2 million in assets, including gold, cash, jewelry, and vehicles. Photo 4, please. This photo shows two Chinese nationals who had bribed a customs official at the Dar es Salaam airport in Tanzania. They were able to smuggle 8 suitcases full of ivory out of Tanzania destined for Hong Kong. Photo 5, please. This photo shows the content of the suitcases that were intercepted and seized in Switzerland while in transit. Our regional U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service attaché was able to assist Tanzania authorities in their investigation and collection of forensic examination of the evidence seized. Photo 6. To illustrate the current illegal wildlife trade in the U.S., this photo shows elephant ivory and narwhal tusks forfeited by an antiques dealer who was sentenced in federal court in New York for the unlawful import and sale of ivory in 2016. Photo 7. This photo is a sample of various elephant tusks, ivory carvings that have been interdicted and seized at the U.S. Mail International Sorting Facility in Miami during the course of an ongoing multi-agency enforcement operation. This operation alone has identified nearly 90 individuals and businesses and involves over 250 smuggling incidents in which elephant ivory was smuggled from the U.S. to China. Next photo, please. This photo depicts over 200 swim bladders that were seized in a California residence drying and awaiting shipment. In 2014 and 2015, CBP, ICE, and Fish and Wildlife Service agents seized over 530 Totawaba swim bladders that were smuggled into the U.S. Totawaba is an endangered fish found only in the Gulf of California, whose swim bladder is highly prized as a delicacy. 11 individuals smuggling Totawaba have been arrested. During an interview with one of those smugglers, he stated that on one occasion, 5 Totawaba swim bladders were sold for $50,000 to a recipient in Hong Kong. While we have made great strides recently to address wildlife trafficking, there is still much work to be done. Wildlife trafficking persists at unsustainable levels, and the role of sophisticated, highly organized criminal networks may present an opportunity to support and fund insurgent or terrorist activities, and makes even more an urgent threat to the wildlife communities and global security. I thank you for the opportunity today to present testimony, and I appreciate the subcommittee's support in our efforts to combat wildlife trafficking, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank all of you for your testimony. For the subcommittees, the members of the subcommittees will have votes shortly, but we will take turns asking questions until the votes begin, and then we will resume 15 minutes after the last vote. I recognize myself for some questions. I've been making a list of the things you have commented on how the bad guys get money. And let me go through those, and then I want you to add those that I missed. First of all, cash from rich donors, the individual donors in foreign countries, they just send cash to the terrorist groups. The black market of goods, as tobacco, for example, as the ranking member mentioned. The trafficking of people, the sale of people as sex slaves, ransom payments, bank robberies, oil on the black market, antiquities, drug trafficking. ISIS tax people in their areas if they are not loyal to ISIS. If they're Christians or some other Muslim faith, they're taxed. This disturbing news about wildlife trafficking. And then you have the state sponsor of terror, Iran, who gives money to Hezbollah wherever they are in the world. Did I leave out any? Y'all are awful quiet. I mean, this is disturbing news here. I'm not going to be critical of what we've done. I just want to try to see if we can move forward and stop the money flow. Mr. Woody, your testimony is compelling. My understanding is if something doesn't happen pretty soon, elephants in Africa and the rhinos are going to be extinct. Is that correct?
That would be correct, sir.
The elephant tusks end up eventually, most of them, not all, end up in China. Is that correct?
That is correct. A good majority.
And rhino horns are ground for their powder, and they end up in Vietnam.
They end up in Vietnam and China. They also use them for libation cups for different carvings as well, too.
All right. And what about foreign charities or charities working in the United States as a foreign or as a charity? Do they raise money for terrorist groups? Any of you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, charities do raise money for terrorist groups.
Like what charities? Do you have any names? You can name names and.
No, I'd be happy to name names. I don't have the names at the tip of my tongue, but as recently as March 31st of this year, we designated 2 charities in Pakistan and Afghanistan who are actively involved in terrorist financing.
Okay. What about domestic charities in the United States?
There have been domestic charities that have been designated and prosecuted for terrorist financing. Holy Land Foundation is probably the largest example of that.
Okay. The Holy Land Foundation. All right. Let me let me ask you this. How do we get all y'all and the folks in law enforcement working to share information, intelligence about what is being done worldwide on financing terror groups? Because my understanding is everybody's kind of doing their own thing. Not saying they're doing a bad job, they're just doing their own thing without coordination with other American government or American agencies and then foreign governments. Ms. Whalen, you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, sir. I think, well, I know from the Department of Defense's standpoint, we actually provide a great deal of support to our partners at Treasury and in law enforcement with our CTF teams and liaison officers. So we are in sort of regular contact with them on a day-to-day basis, working together to share information. We have a number of enterprises within the Washington area in which we gather together to share information, situational awareness. So I think while there is always room for improvement, I think we have a pretty good basis right now of information sharing. Certainly we feel between the Department of Defense and the...
Well, are we doing enough? Are we doing enough? I'm not critical of what we're doing. I'm just asking, are we doing enough? Because of all of these different ways that the bad guys, outlaws, raise money, how can we move forward to do even a better job? You got some ideas?
Well, I think we can just expand on what we are currently doing, and we are getting better at it. Certainly there are resource constraints in terms of people and in terms of intelligence collection assets, but we are definitely improving our coordination. I think we've made a lot of progress in just the last couple of years.
All right, I'll have additional questions I'll submit for the record for you all to answer. I'll recognize the chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Wilson from South Carolina.
Thank you, Judge Poe, and thank you for your obvious passion about this issue and making a difference. And Secretary Whalen, in your testimony, you discussed how the Department of Defense is working to institutionalize counter-threat finance capabilities across the force and within the services. Can you provide some additional examples of how you're doing this? And additionally, are you seeing demand for counter-threat finance experts continue? And if so, how are you managing that while other resources across the department continue to diminish? And finally, is the counter-threat finance a high enough priority for commanders to pay attention and dedicate resources to so that we can properly institutionalize lessons learned?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we actually, number one, the first part is we are progressively institutionalizing counter-threat finance within the department, and it has gained tremendous amount of traction, particularly in the combatant commands. But a couple of things, additional things we're doing beyond the DoD directive that I mentioned in my testimony. We are including CTF in our professional military education courses. In fact, the National Guard Bureau has been very helpful to us in developing courses for CTF for personnel within the U.S. military. Additionally, the services are now, as they manage their personnel, they are looking for people with CTF skill sets so that they can provide them. There is a demand signal from the COCOMs, particularly CENTCOM, and it has a very significant and robust CTF effort. I was just down in Tampa 2 weeks ago and met with that team. So this is definitely got traction within the department. I don't see that it will lose traction. We have integrated into our program planning and budget process, and we are also working with the COCOMs to integrate CTF into planning and doctrine. So I believe that we do obviously have resource constraints in terms of personnel available to devote to this, and as I mentioned briefly, the intelligence assets that we have to devote to this. But within the constraints that we are currently working under, I think everyone is putting forward 100% effort to do more on the CTF front.
Well, we certainly look forward to working with you on that. And Chief Woody, you've really gotten the attention of Judge Poe. He was extremely intrigued by this particular picture. If you could explain it one more time. And then how is it that Fish and Wildlife is coordinating with law enforcement efforts across the United States to stop the global financing?
Okay. You want me to explain the picture again?
Yeah, one more time, please.
Those are totawaba fish bladders. Totawaba is a fish that's found in the Sea of Cortez, and they dry the totawaba bladders out. Totawaba bladders sell, they make a soup called maw, and totawaba bladders, they do sell for $10,000 and higher on those. So and that particular picture there, ICE was working a case in conjunction with Fish and Wildlife Service. Really what that is, that's a drop house, and they were moving the totawaba bladders up into the U.S. They were being dried in that house, and they were waiting shipment to they were making a shipment to Asia and move them there. So to coordinate,
And one inquiry, you said Sea of Cortez. Where is that?
or in Gulf of Mexico, not the Gulf of Mexico, and Sea of Cortez, California, off the coast of Baja.
Okay, but Colonel Cook is very familiar with this, so he'll let us know.
Okay. Very good.
Well, that's very serious.
Thanks. And then the other thing, coordinating, we have, with the executive order on wildlife trafficking, I have to say in the last 3 years, all the people sitting at this table, they all have people that sit on the wildlife task force. And we have coordinated through the United States and throughout the world on setting up a whole number of different things that we've never really been at with wildlife before. For example, with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we are now establishing attaché positions throughout the world. Currently, we have just put 5 people out in regions that tie into State Department's wildlife enforcement networks. We've put 5 attachés out. We're planning to put another 4 out this year. They work very closely in regions with the governments in different regions working on wildlife trafficking issues, everything from the finance to the trafficking to the lab work that they need done as well.
Thank you very much.
I thank the gentleman from South Carolina. The committees will be in recess until 15 minutes after the last vote starts, and we will resume with the questions from Mr. Keating from Massachusetts. The subcommittees are in recess. Subcommittees will come to order. The chair recognizes the ranking member of the Terrorism Subcommittee, Mr. Bill Keating from Massachusetts, for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Curious, there's been cooperation with the United States and the EU in terms of the so-called SWIFT agreement, which is the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. I'm sorry. And I wanted to know, we've heard that there's concern from the European front that privacy issues might present problems with them cooperating on that. Could any of you comment on that being compromised by their concerns, and if there's going to be any alterations in that, whether that's going to be something we should be concerned about? Anyone?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. We have very close cooperation, as you say, with the Europeans on our SWIFT program.
Can you talk a little louder?
I'm sorry.
We're 5 miles away from you up here, so would you talk louder? Thank you.
I apologize, Congressman. We do have very close cooperation with the Europeans on the SWIFT program, and privacy issues are frequently brought up as part of that conversation, but we've always managed to work through those issues, and our cooperation with the Europeans will remain very strong on that program.
All right. I was really, as the Chairman and I were discussing during the break, we're both struck by the fact that there's $80 billion annually that comes from directly from illicit tobacco trade. It's now equal to cocaine trade in terms of illicit. Is there anything being done to curb that illegal trade? What's being done? Is that being used by any groups as well? Mr. Glazer, again.
Well, I don't have anything specifically to say about illicit tobacco trade. I'm sure it's a source of organized crime proceeds. I have not seen any indication that it's a significant source of terrorist financing proceeds. Certainly, our anti-money laundering regulatory and criminal regime would cover any proceeds.
Would
of
it
that
be the
we would
same
go
for
after.
human trafficking as well? That's something you don't hear about, but is there any way these groups are getting any kind of funds indirectly or directly from human trafficking?
Well, I believe ISIL does derive proceeds from human trafficking. I would say it's more in the order of criminal networks that are involved in human trafficking that operate in ISIL territory, and that ISIL would tax the proceeds, would tax or charge fees for allowing them to participate in that activity.
There's been a lot of focus with ISIL on use of the cyber networks for propaganda and recruitment, but also the virtual currency exchange platforms are something of a concern as well, because it's public knowledge now that those involved in the Paris attacks used prepaid cards to rent hotel rooms the night before the attack. We also have concerns with Bitcoin and other financing mechanisms. Is that something you see as a new challenge or a challenge that you've already seen and trying to address?
Certainly, the use of virtual currency, Bitcoin, prepaid cards, things like that are emerging challenges for us. We have revised our anti-money laundering regulations to require a certain amount of transparency with respect to how those financial products operate. The European Union has not done so yet. I've actually traveled to Brussels to have detailed discussions with them on this issue, and they are looking at a variety of reforms that they could make, actually very, very similar to the types of steps that we've taken. It is true that there are examples of terrorist organizations, including ISIL, using these types of products, but I have to say, I don't think that there's sort of systemic, it represents a systemic threat at this time. I think there's other ways that these organizations use to move funds that are far more significant for them.
Yeah, Mr. Keller in particular, Turkey was recently taken off the Financial Action Task Force gray list, which is used to describe as jurisdictions with deficiencies when it comes to counterterrorism financing, because it passed new terror finance laws. But there are experts out there telling us that Turkey's implementation of its terror finance laws has been poor. Do you agree with that assessment? And if so, what's the State Department doing to encourage Turkey to substantively go after terror financing in that regard?
Thank you for the excuse me. Thank you for the question, Congressman. I'd start off by saying we work closely with Turkey on a variety of fronts. They're a member of our Counter-ISIL Finance Working Group. Through recent high-level engagements, we now have a border security group that's working on border security and aviation. We are pleased that they've come off the FATF gray list. I think that's a positive step. I think it's fair to say that they're not necessarily perfect. No country is, but we continue to work with them to try to encourage them to implement their laws and basically strengthen their efforts on counterterrorism and anti-money laundering. I think it's also important to recognize that Turkey itself has been victimized by ISIL terrorism, and so they have a strong incentive and are active in trying to eliminate ISIL facilitation networks in their country. Yeah. And I'd invite any of the other panelists to talk about that.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. I think my time is up, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman from Massachusetts. Chair recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Langevin from Rhode Island, for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of our witnesses again for your testimony here today. So I'd like to go back to the discussion we've been having earlier about lessons learned. So we've touched on how each agency, specifically DOD, is institutionalizing counter-threat financing. I'm also interested in understanding how CTF is being institutionalized across the whole of government through defined roles, responsibilities, and organizational constructs, allowing for more synchronized efforts at a more strategic level. So Afghanistan CTF was successful. Were there lessons learned here?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. So just to speak about how the Treasury Department's organized for a moment, and then to speak more broadly about the United States government, the Treasury Department is actually unique among all finance ministries in the world that we have one office run by an undersecretary, Treasury Department, that brings together all of the expertise, all the resources, all the tools, all the authorities, all the contacts that we have as a finance ministry, and puts them for the singular purpose of advancing U.S. national security, of using financial tools to advance U.S. national security. We're the only finance ministry in the world with our own all-source intelligence office. We have a sanctions implementation office. We have my office, which is a policy office, and we have a financial intelligence unit, FinCEN, all under one roof. And it gives us a huge range of unique expertise and unique capabilities that we have to put at the disposal of the United States government. I do think that we're actually quite well coordinated across the United States government. As I said in my opening statement, there are two components of our efforts against terrorist financing. The first component is the systemic component, the regulatory component, making sure that the international financial system and our financial system is transparent and is well regulated, and that it does not provide opportunities for terrorist groups, organized crime groups, or drug trafficking groups, or any other group, Iran, rogue regimes, to gain access to the financial system. That is largely an effort of coordination among the Treasury Department, among regulators, among law enforcement, and we have a number of groups that allow us to do that, most importantly, and I should say, in partnership with the private sector. And we have groups like the Bank Secrecy Act Advisory Group for that. We had a anti-money laundering task force along with the regulators. There's a number of groups that allow us to coordinate on that. The second part is the targeted part, the operational part of identifying and undermining terrorist organizations. And again, I feel the government is well coordinated on that. The National Counterterrorism Center within the intelligence community organizes intelligence analysis with respect to terrorism broadly. My counterpart within Treasury, the head of our intelligence office, Leslie Ireland, Assistant Secretary for Intelligence and Analysis, is also the intelligence community's mission manager for illicit finance. And then on an organization by organization basis, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's ISIL, whether it's Al Qaeda, there's any number of coordination processes that are run by the NSC that allow us all to get together and make sure that we're well coordinated on the issue.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Keller.
I think I would simply add to that whether I look to my right to Assistant Secretary Glazer or to my left to Assistant Secretary Whalen, I think the counter-ISIL effort is a very good example of the coordination that we do on a daily basis. Our teams work together basically nonstop. The goal of the effort is to have a synchronized and sustained and aggressive campaign to counter ISIL's finances, using basically all available national resources, whether they're coming on the kinetic side through DoD and CENTCOM, whether they're on the diplomatic side with the State Department and working very closely with Treasury in diplomatic engagements multilaterally and bilaterally, or a range of other tools, including the State Department's capacity building programs. I just note that those programs, I think, are some of the most effective things that we can do overall, in that they're trying to drive systemic change. So, for example, Ranking Member Keating had mentioned cigarette smuggling earlier. These programs aren't necessarily targeted at cigarette smuggling or wildlife trafficking or whatnot. They're targeted overall at building investigatory capacity, prosecutorial capacity, judicial capacity. We work with customs agencies in other countries to try to strengthen all of it, and it can have a positive effect on our counterterrorism efforts as well.
Thank you. My time's expired, so I'll ask Secretary Whalen and Mr. Woody to respond, if you would, in writing. And Secretary Whalen, for the record, I have a question for you, which is, how is intel shared in a timely manner so that all agencies are working within an updated intel picture? So if I had more time, I'd get your answer, but my time expired. I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Rhode Island. Ms. Whalen, submit the answer to that question to both committee chairs, the full committee chairs, and that will be dispersed to everyone, including the gentleman from Rhode Island. Chair recognizes Colonel Cook. I started to say farmer marine, but there's no such thing as a farmer marine, from California.
Thank you, Judge. You're absolutely correct. Mr. Keller, I wanted to, if I were President of the United States, heaven forbid, but if I said to you, what do you think 1, 2, or 3 are the top countries, state-sponsored aid, financial aid to ISIS or ISIL or Daesh, whatever you want to call them, who would you name, 1, 2, or 3? Just briefly.
Congressman,
Real brief.
I think I understand the concern about
No, just
terrorism.
in your opinion, I'm asking you as the President of the United States, 1, 2, or 3, who do you think they are?
It's a fair question. I don't really have an answer.
Okay,
because we're not seeing.
Okay, then let's go back to what you were commenting on about Turkey. And I have a different impression of Turkey because of Erdogan. I've got some issues with the, I understand the war against the PKK, but I'm also concerned about what they're doing to the rest of the Kurds, which is one of our allies against ISIS. And it's almost like, are we overlooking that some people, particularly with Erdogan, switched to the leaning towards the Muslim Brotherhood? Could you address that briefly? Real brief. I'm running out of time.
I appreciate the question. I'm going to have to take that one back. As I mentioned, my focus in this area is specifically on the counter-ISIL financial front. So I'd like to take your question back to our Turkey.
Okay, then let me move on to Hamas. Is Hamas helping them out with financing ISIS?
Not that I'm aware of, sir.
So okay. Moving on to, well, you don't want to address that. Mr. Glazer, did you want to comment on that about the situation in Turkey, whether, you know, a number of months ago they were helping out with the oil and everything like that with ISIS. Any comments on that at all in the intel sector?
I think that Turkey has stepped up its efforts on the counter-smuggling side. I do think Turkey, as was discussed earlier, has work to do on its financial system in terms of implementing its terrorist financing laws and making sure that its financial system is not available to ISIL.
Yeah. You don't want to answer my question about 1, 2, or 3, or I'm just a dumb marine, so I have to have simple
I'll answer your
answers.
question directly. I do not think ISIL receives state sponsorship. I do not think ISIL receives state sponsorship from any country. I think Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and they sponsor Hezbollah. I do not think
I agree
ISIL
with you on
receives
that.
state sponsorship.
Okay. And no situation, you're not worried about the states such as Qatar or some of the Gulf states at all they're involved with state that's sponsoring ISIS?
I do not think Qatar is a state sponsor of ISIS, no.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman from California. Without objection, the chair will recognize Ms. Gabbard from Hawaii, who is a member of both full committees. Unless there's objection, without objection, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Keller, you and both Mr. Glazer, you've talked about how Turkey has stepped up and that they're doing more. Can you give us more specifics on what that is? Because like many of my colleagues, we have concerns about the leadership in Turkey, what they have done directly and indirectly, what they have not done, more importantly, as well as the informal economy that we know ISIS is using to both smuggle cash and other things to boost their revenue.
Well, thank you for the question. With respect to Turkey, in terms of the things that I think that they're doing well, I think that Turkey has stepped up its counter-smuggling efforts along the border, and I think that they have done that significantly, and I think it has had an impact.
Can you give some specifics about stepping up from nothing to what, or from here to there, and some specifics on the border as well, especially the area of the border that remains open?
I'm going to have to get back to you with...
Because I'm trying to get some context here, because Mr. Keller said Turkey is not perfect, but perfect is a pretty high bar. So I'm trying to figure out.
Well, I think the areas where I would say Turkey has a lot of work to do is in taking steps to deny ISIL access to its financial system, to its financial institutions. We have an active information exchange program with the Turks. We are in close communication with them to make sure that they understand what we understand with respect to the access that terrorist organizations may have to certain institutions. And I think it's important for Turkey to follow up on that information.
I would agree with Assistant Secretary Glazer's assessment. I'd also note specifically on the oil front, it is our assessment that ISIL is not smuggling or selling oil to Turkey or to individuals in Turkey, that the oil that is being produced in ISIL-controlled territory is being sold and consumed in ISIL-controlled territory.
And is that something that has changed as of late, or were the reports that that was occurring completely false?
I'd say that's something that we have been able to get a much clearer picture of as of, well, I don't want to say as of late, but some of the most helpful information and insightful information we were able to glean on this issue came from the Abu Sayyaf raid last year. He was the emir for oil and antiquities, oil and gas and antiquities, who was killed by U.S. Special Forces, and they were able to recover a treasure trove of information, including on ISIL's oil activities, and the picture that we were able to develop from that information helped us assess that the oil was being consumed within ISIL-controlled territory and not being smuggled into Turkey.
Are there other operations or things happening in this informal market or smuggling other than oil that you're aware of?
I think it's possible that antiquities are being smuggled out through basically the neighboring countries to Iraq and Syria, Turkey being one of them.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, for 5 minutes and his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Glazer, what is the current policy of the administration regarding U.S. dollars and Iran? Or U.S. dollars are hard currency, right? You characterize that as hard currency?
Yes.
And what's the current policy regarding hard currency, particularly U.S. dollars and Iran?
You cannot engage in dollar transactions with Iran.
All right, so we're trying to ensure that they don't get hard currency, particularly U.S. dollars, right? I'm sure you're aware that Iranian's Guardian Council just approved the military budget for 2016-2017, which increased their military budget by 90%, including $1.7 billion transferred by the U.S. Treasury in January. Which allegedly has nothing to do with a prisoner swap that happened, or a U.S. hostage swap that happened literally at the same time. I'm just wondering, that transfer of $1.7 billion, what currency was that? What was that currency that was transferred?
I'd have to go back and find the answer out to that for you.
$1.7 billion. You have no idea.
No, I do not know. I do not know what currency.
All right, all right. If you would please, for the record, I would like the answer to that. You know, the fact that it's going to, it went directly to the military, to the Iranian military. At this point, looking at ISIS taking American equipment left in Iraq, and now, which, you know, paid for with American tax dollars, is it fair for me to answer my constituents who say to me, haven't we now funded both sides of this war? What, is it fair to say we have, in some sense? I mean, it's not a gotcha question, but I mean, literally, haven't we essentially funded both sides of this war?
No, I don't think that would be a fair thing to say.
Why not?
I think that we are doing everything that we can to attack ISIL's finances. I think.
Wait. ISIS has American paid-for equipment, military equipment, paid for by the American taxpayers, right? So they're on one side of the operation. Now, we just gave $1.7 billion to Iran in some currency. We don't know right now what that is. At least you don't know. And they're using it, they send it directly to the military, increased their military spending this year by 90%. That's on the other side. How is this not the American taxpayer being on both sides of this fight?
So ISIL got its hands on a lot of U.S. military equipment when they won battles in an ongoing war. I don't think it would be accurate to say that the United States is providing ISIL military equipment.
Well, it wasn't the Russians.
It would be accurate to
wasn't
say
the Chinese.
The United States is
wasn't the
actively
Mexicans.
engaged in military operations against ISIL.
Let me ask you, with this $1.7 billion payment to Iran, essentially at this very same time, 5 U.S. hostages were sent home, and the perception from Americans that it was payment and ransom, and as stated by Iran, that it was paid for. They called them spies, not hostages. Doesn't this undermine our policy that we would hope other nations would take to not pay ransoms? How do we have the moral authority to request that they not pay ransom when it appears to anybody who's looking that we have paid $1.7 billion to Iran for 5 hostages?
Yes, I understand the question. The fact of the matter is that was not a ransom paid for hostages. We have been very consistent in our policy of no payment of ransom for hostages, and this is something that we've worked very closely with countries on around the world to ensure that there's a global agreement, a global consensus that payment of ransom for hostages is not an appropriate response to the problem.
So if we pay and we get hostages at the same time and we just say we didn't, then that equates to it not being that. Essentially suspend reality and just say, well, it's 2 different things. I mean, that's rhetorical. I apologize. Mr. Keller, Hawala, if you can tell us anything you know about what we're doing about Hawala being used for illicit purposes, particularly to fund terrorism, what you're doing, and if you have any ideas of how the U.S. Congress can help in that effort.
Thank you, Congressman. I think in the counter-ISIL context, for example, one of the most important things that we've been trying to do all along is make sure that ISIL is cut off from the financial system, whether it's formal financial system or informal financial system. I think through a lot of good work from, including from our Treasury Department, early on, they worked very closely with the Iraqis to cut off banks that were in ISIL-controlled territory from the international financial system. In addition, we've been working with the Iraqis to cut off money exchange houses and more informal operations that are engaged in Hawala-type activities that are in ISIL-controlled territory from their ability to participate.
But it's not just ISIL-related. Hawala is used for various measures by numerous countries, not just ISIL and not just Iraq. So is there anything that the Congress can do in that regard that we haven't done already?
Well, sir, I think you're exactly right that it is not just ISIL-related. And I can tell you, if you indulge me, I'll tell you one other thing that the State Department is doing, which I mentioned earlier, which are these capacity building programs that increase the capacity for other countries on anti-money laundering and counterterrorism finance programs, whether it's in their judiciary or prosecutorial services. These are things that can be very helpful, and we also work with Treasury departments around the world. These are things that can be very helpful.
One final question in that vein, if the chairman will indulge me. Do you have any way to quantify when you say they can be helpful? So the American people are going to pay a certain amount to aid these other countries. How do we quantify the results? How do we quantify what we paid for and what we got? Is there any way?
That's a great question, Congressman. I would like to take that back and get you an answer in writing, and I'll discuss that.
Look forward to your response. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields back his time. Without objection, the document that Mr. Woody provided, that both committees will be made part of the record. And also, There may be more questions from other members of the committee. As soon as you receive those questions, we'd want answers in 2 weeks. And I encourage members to file those questions by tomorrow. And I want to thank the Armed Services Committee and the Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities, Mr. Wilson from South Carolina, and the ranking member, Mr. Langeman from Rhode Island, for this joint subcommittee hearing, and the subcommittees are adjourned.